I was fortunate to come across Peter Scott when I interviewed him on his most recent book for the IAPCNM, which is the British accreditation body for coaches and mentors. Now, basically, the short version is Peter is a top computer scientist, also specialized in human development, with certifications in coaching and NLP, and with a mission to help us and his clients leverage artificial intelligence. Peter's the author of 2 books on artificial intelligence, Crisis of Control and Artificial Intelligence and You, what AI means for your life, your work, and your world. And this sounded like too important a topic for me to ask him if he would be so kind as to come on this program as well, Fabulous After 50, so that we can learn more about a topic which does frighten a lot of us. But before we go there, Peter, can you start with telling us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Well, thank you, Julie. Thank you for inviting me on the show. I'm delighted to be here and to meet your listeners. And I have been in computers and technology ever since graduating computer science from Cambridge back in the day. And after that, going to work for NASA in California. And at the same time, as you were saying, I got involved on the side in things like coaching and neurolinguistic programming and a lot of trainings in that respect that I needed. And that led me to a dual perspective that really came to the fore when I had children. They're now
Right.
8 and 12. And when they arrived, I found myself asking, given what I know about how artificial intelligence is likely to reshape the world and how fast that's likely to happen, and given our responsibilities to make that come out as good as we can, then I had to do something about that. And for some reason, it turned out that what my mission was, and it was something that I asked, what is this? It wasn't something I decided. It was to communicate about that with as many people as possible. And since then, that's what I've been doing.
Well, I'm very grateful for that mission. And I mean, first of all, I suppose firsthand, it sounds like a quite unusual combination, a sort of computer scientist and then the human triggers within it, and which is a shame. It is supposed to be serving mankind, right? It's not just a robot dry thing. So we need to know what the needs are. And there's been enough discussion over the last, let's say, 50 years about who's leading who. And now, of course, it has all come to a peak with artificial intelligence. And I suppose lots of us, we're talking about a 50 plus audience, right? So we're not talking about the super savvy, very young and all of that. I mean, I'm not even 100% sure what most of us know it is, if you see what I mean. Because I mean, we have these sort of frightening nightmare scenarios where these computers take over the world, and are we sort of just part of a grid, and do we still have willpower and all of that? I mean, can we start, this program is very sort of easy access. How would you define artificial intelligence to start with?
Well, certainly, I like to define it as a computer doing something that a human could do given enough time, but they couldn't write down the rules for. They just, it's something we do intuitively. Now, that's a little divergent from the official explanations of AI, but I think it's the one that's the most useful, and it speaks the most to what you were saying about our fears, because those are basically philosophical exercises picked up by a few philosophers and then amplified by the media because they make such great sound bites. Now, there's no smoke without fire. There is something to those, but they unreasonably dominate the conversation when we start talking about the impact of artificial intelligence. It's that word intelligence that's doing it to us. But what AI is at the moment is essentially a giant pattern finder and pattern maker. And it turns out that a lot of the things that we do as humans that we thought are exercising a very natural, native, general intelligence are susceptible to being solved by pattern finders and pattern makers, all the way from playing chess to driving cars.
Right. So the question is more sort of, where do we, I think the idea is, okay, it's great to have a machine which can do things that man maybe doesn't want to do, or who can do it with a lot less human error. I'm thinking about flying a plane and things like that. We are more prone to errors than something programmed. But then, of course, as we talk about the drones and all of that, then the human factor is taken out. How does it recognize what is what? But I think it then gets to the point where we're saying that they're going to develop their own intelligence, let's say these computers, which means that they would then be able to make decisions without man. I think it was okay, the idea that we plan and program it to do what we tell it to do, but we don't want it developing a intelligence which may turn out to be superior to ours and then start telling us what to do. I love the fact that you say that it was actually your children and your desire for them to have a good future and to make good decisions with what they do in their life, which were the catalyst for you to decide that this is your mission. Informing, right, your clients, and I mean anybody you can, about artificial intelligence. If I look at the name of your most recent book, so Artificial Intelligence and You, and what does it mean for your life, your work, and your world? I mean, what do you think it means?
Wow, what a huge question. That took me a book to answer that. And I think, well, for particularly of relevance to your listeners here, that, and me also being way on the north side of the 50 barrier, so we are definitely in sync there, that what it means is a revolution. It's been likened by people who are speaking seriously to the invention of electricity and the invention of fire. And it's because it's moving in this direction of automating, electrifying, amplifying, and accelerating human thought. Now, there's a huge scale of that. And of course, when I say things like that, people jump right to the robot revolution and when are they coming for us? And it's not that you can't think about that, and people even do think about that, but it's not a problem that we have today. One AI pioneer who's kind of poo-poos that, Andrew Ng, says worrying about threats from AI is like worrying about overpopulation on Mars.
Right. Okay. So
which
it's quite
one day
hopefully
would be
in the
a problem,
future. Right.
but not the thing that we need to think about now. Whereas right now there are issues with bias and transparency and explainability of AI that are affecting people right now, and it's up to us to understand those and overcome those to use AI for the good that it can do.
Right. So, I mean, can you give me an example of that?
Sure. It mostly comes down to data at the moment. Algorithms, the programming is neutral, but AI is trained by data. The more data you have, the better. So data is king here. And the one example, for instance, is Amazon hires a lot of people, and the hiring process is labor intensive. You've got to interview people, you've got to read through resumes. Well, they automated their resume scanning with an AI that they trained on the resumes of people they had previously hired, because those would be good examples, right? Just like you train a chess playing AI on examples of good play, you would do this, right? Well, they discovered that the result was biased against women. Why? Because most of the people Amazon had hired in engineering roles were men up until that point. So it learned from that one of the factors that doesn't work for an Amazon engineer is that chromosome. And it learned how to infer that. If someone said captain of women's soccer team, it would say, oh, well, it doesn't matter whether I can see any other clue, because they didn't put the gender down there. It figured it all out by itself, what kind of names were female and all that. Now, its data was accurate, but it didn't reflect what they wanted going forward. They wanted to give the women an equal chance. So they had to take that offline. That's an example of this. There are numerous examples of this sort of thing.
Yeah, and I mean, we can't do away with it, right? I mean, would you say it's part of evolution anyway? You know, I mean, we can't sort of say, okay, let's stop everything to do with artificial intelligence. Let's put it back in the box. We can't do that, right? And why would we?
And that's a very good point. It's a dual use technology, like so many are, can be used for good or bad, or deliberately or accidentally. And it really will provide some amazing transformation. So I wouldn't want to stop it even if I could. But the key thing is, no, you can't. That debate is pointless. I liken it to riding a kayak down rapids, and asking, can I change the course of the river? You don't
Right.
have that option, but you can paddle at places that might make the difference between going down a small rapid and going over a 100-foot waterfall.
So is that what you do with your clients? You know, when we're talking about you helping clients leverage artificial intelligence. So by leverage, you mean use it in a way which works for them?
Right. Because I'm a coach and my message is human centric, and there are plenty of people in the technology space already. I am mostly focused on the people. What do you need to change in your mindset to leverage artificial intelligence by understanding it properly and what it can do? Artificial intelligence acts as a mirror to us at the moment in the ways that it's expanding right now and surprising us. It reveals things to us that if we're willing and open to recognize them, illuminate far more about our process than they do about the computers.
Right. Now, is that something that you're talking about, you know, big giants doing, you know, like Amazon and all of that? Or is there a way that we as, let's say, individuals can do that too?
Well, that's a great question. And because training an AI requires a lot of data, that's where the big players, as you mentioned, have the unreasonable advantage. That's why Google gives away so many products, because the data that we
Yeah.
provide them by using things like Gmail and Maps is far more valuable to them than anything we could pay them. So if you're an entrepreneur, then if you're a small entrepreneur, you want to not compete with that, because if you don't have that amount of data, going head to head with Amazon or Walmart, you're not going to
Yeah.
win that battle, because they can spend a large amount on AI that they can scale across the whole enterprise. You can't do that. You want to be focused instead, and this comes from understanding about what AI can do, on generating unique value, and then seeing where are there ways that AI can leverage that for you. I mean, it depends very much on the vertical, right? Even in the gross distinction of product versus service, huge differences in what you would do here. But that if you can focus on being a creative, innovative service agent, like here we are talking as coaches, that's
Right.
an example, then you have an opportunity to stay ahead of being automated, for one thing. And just using coaches as an example, there are now AI coaching tools that help. Of course, we think, oh, but the AI is going to do the coaching. Yes, there are some examples of that, but that's not where you should be focusing. It's on systems like, they're called e-coaching systems, that can use AI to give you data about the client that helps you.
Right.
As just
But
an
it's not taking
example.
away the human factor, right?
Right. It's what it's doing. The ideal thing is you want something that takes away the part you don't want to do.
Yes.
You want, whenever you are doing a job and you feel like you're being a machine at that point, that's the thing you want to see if you can get an AI to do for you.
Right. Right. And I mean, you mention in your book as well, and you have mentioned it already, women, right? Do you see women as being more, I think disenfranchised was the word that you used?
Mm.
And that
It's
comes from the models that it's using, which are mostly, you know, like the example you've just given about Amazon's requiring. Where does that come from?
It certainly comes from data, and you've got to look at data. And this is where I would say to women, get involved, because people doing this by and large are not malicious, not trying to exclude women. It's just that they didn't think of
Yeah.
that, and so they're charging ahead doing what they're doing, but the result is amplifying the mistakes and accelerating the mistakes that people are already prone to making. So if you're not focused on this being an arena where it needs that influence, then it will take off without that. So I'd say get involved. And you can take an example from the pre-AI world. It used to be that 7% of professional symphony orchestra players were female. This is going back a way, obviously. Well, that increased to 21%, something like that, only after they went to blind auditions.
Ah,
And so that the people listening couldn't see who was playing. Now, I don't think those people who were listening would say, oh, well, I prefer male players. I don't think they would have realized that, but they were. The
yeah.
statistics are unavoidable, even to the point where in some places they had to get them to take their shoes off because the unconscious bias from just hearing a woman's shoes strut across the stage was enough to give that cue. Just as the Amazon AI figured out that someone playing lacrosse more likely to be female, making that up, but that sort of
I get
thing.
your point. Yeah, so I mean that you have to. So it's more a question of, we need to understand what it is, right? Instead of shrieking in horror and sticking our head in the sand, it's basically, the knowledge, is what's going to give us the tools. So is that what you do with the clients who come to you? I mean, what sort of clients come to you?
Sure. Well, the truth shall set you free, right? And work mostly with businesses that use technology but are not developing it. And you gave a very key point there, which is agency, the feeling of control. So it's the feeling of being helpless that we generate from not knowing about something really big that really disempowers us. And so I seek to just take the veil away, show the man behind the curtain of what's going on here, so that it becomes something where you don't feel like there's this vast unknown, that you have a sense of what's going on. Yes, it's big, but as long as you feel that you have some control over your corner of the world, then it doesn't have to be frightening. If you think about climate change as an example, right? As long as we look at that as this big thing that we have no say in, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Now, if you feel like you can do something, anything, you get an electric car, do more recycling, something, we know those things. If we're engaged on doing those things, they may still not be enough, but it removes the terror.
Yes.
It removes that feeling of not knowing how to be a part of this.
Indeed, and as you say, that sort of helplessness and that feeling that something's being done to us that we're not sure we understand, and artificial intelligence, brings back all the things associated, with like cloning and all these things which have frightened us for years. And I dare say that in a way there is the additional sort of disadvantage, let's say, that women in particular of this target group, as in 50, 60, 70 have, is that maybe for years we were less in the technology world to start with. We're great at what we do, but the technical side of things, or anything to do with, science, etc., is the part that doesn't naturally attract us. Obviously, thank goodness that has changed. But I think it's maybe contributes even more to the sort of, oh my gosh, hopefully I'll be long gone before it takes over sort of thing. But we're talking about our children here. I mean, what would you wish for your daughters?
Well, I want to answer that, but I first want to poke at what you were saying about the women involvement in technology. And in fact, the earliest computers, the word computer meant people who were calculating things by hand, and those were universally women who were very good at working in teams to pass numbers and calculations around reliably. Because they're one of the first groups to be automated. In the early days of computer science, there was a much higher representation of women than started from the late 80s onwards. Now, there are fields in artificial intelligence right now where actually women and older women are dominating the development.
This shows you how little I know on the topic.
Some of these names are worth looking up. Fei Li at Stanford created ImageNet, created the first revolution in image recognition. Cynthia Brazil at MIT has done groundbreaking research on robots and how we can empathize with them, or they can empathize with us. And Rosalind Picard and Rana El-Kalioubi have done work on effective computing, which is, and you may sense a theme here, how to detect emotions of users, something that more male computer scientists would go, that's a bit too fuzzy for me. But that field of has a lot of top-notch women PhDs driving it.
Wow, now I stand corrected. And that, I mean, especially, the angle, as you say, I mean, that makes total sense. I mean, in a way, it's a bit like taking the science plus the human part of it, so the emotional part of it as well. Okay, right. Now for the listeners, I always ask for 3 tips. What would you say we can do, in order to understand and leverage it, to take away that fear, to, as you say, look at what we can control in our little corner of the world?
Right. Well, I'd say number one, be aware. There are so many ways that you can play with AI right now. For instance, the new large language models that are doing image synthesis. You can get a free one or one that costs pennies. Just Google for things like Mid-Journey or Stable Diffusion. And there are places where you can go and you can type in a phrase like a camel on a bicycle, and it will draw a picture of that for you, and you can play around
Right.
with how to do that, so you can see how AI now interacts with art. The key point here is to be aware of what's out there, not assume that this is technology that has got a no girls allowed sign on the door, and then get involved. I mean, that's one way to get involved, is what I described, just playing around
Yeah,
with it.
try it. Yeah.
But to raise awareness among your peers and discuss this, because the more you do discuss this, the more you'll find that the things that have been perhaps paralyzing you are really chimera. They're really evanescent things that disappear when you grasp them. You find there's this little thing inside that's got something to it, but it really, the rest of it was blown up mostly by the tabloids. And that by discussing this together, by getting it out in the open, you can start to get at where AI is important right now. And then you'll maybe find places where it intersects with your world.
Yeah.
That needs to be some attention focused on it. Maybe you'll find that AI is being used in a local election in some way, or in products or in your companies, and you want to ask them the hard questions about how did you get your data? How is it curated? How have you guaranteed it's free of bias? How do you explain your decisions?
Right.
And how do we know that you've done these things? Those hard questions. And if you're not paralyzed by the thought of this taking over, or that this is a male only world, you can ask those questions that put them on the spot. And that would be the third thing, is keep asking questions, stay curious. This is evolving at phenomenal rates. These large language models that we were just talking about only came out in the last 9 months or so. Prior to that, image generation, picture generation by AI looked like a Dali-esque nightmare, like Salvador Dali, gone on a bad trip. And now they're generating photorealistic images that are perfectly balanced. Frankly, I don't even know how they're doing that. And so ask questions, because when you embrace this world and the ride it's on, it can turn from being seasickness to a roller coaster of the good kind.
Of the good kind, right? I mean, it can be a force for good, and that's obviously how it all started off, right? I mean, it was the idea of helping us as a tool, and not as something which was there to destroy us, or take over or whatever. Okay, now Peter, I'd just like you to give us a little bit of an update on what you actually do in your company and the coaching. You explain, you demystify, I think, the topic, and then you teach companies how they can use it to their benefit?
Yes. Well, we have coaching models that myself, my colleagues have developed over several years that are designed to help people become more resilient through to disruption, and in fact, to be able to leverage disruption. And this is about the inner game. It's not about the technology. Technology will take care of itself. But this is about, how do you go through this process? So the broad strokes of this will be familiar to coaches, because it's first illuminating, well, where are you unconscious about this? Where do we need to wake you up to what's going on? And then we go through this process of exercises that help people develop more agency, as we've been talking about, understand the environment and the world that they're in their business and outside of it, how people are reacting to what's going on, and how to like go meta to the issues that we've been talking about, see them from a third perspective, so that they can understand the reaction to artificial intelligence right now as a social phenomenon, be able to change that, to move that needle in the areas that matter the most to them. So it's going all the way to a mastery of the ability to shape disruption within your sphere of influence.
Ooh, now that's a beautiful, and I mean, who doesn't want that, right? Okay, and so what is the name? I haven't actually mentioned it. What is the name of your company and where can people actually get hold of you?
Sure, we call ourselves the Next Wave Institute, and you can look for nextwaveinstitute.org and see who we are there. I've got my colleague Pierre Dussault, who is in Quebec, and we have psychologists and business experts and authors, and what we all have in common is the mission that I've been describing.
Wonderful. Okay, and your book, where can we get hold of it?
Yep. Well, Artificial Intelligence and You, What AI Means for Your Life, Your Work, and Your World is available through Amazon. And if you want to get it from a bookstore, just ask them to get it from the Ingram catalog.
From the Ingram catalog. Okay, then maybe I need to ask what's next for you then? We've got our 2 books on artificial intelligence, and at the speed everything's developing, is it time already for a third?
Well, this one was 2 years in the making, so you're giving me some trauma just by suggesting that. I need the amnesia to set in first before I can contemplate that one. I've got the podcast, which is every week, and that's also called Artificial Intelligence and You.
Thanks
You
for
can just
reminding
Google
me.
for that. And that explores the same issues at more leisure. And I've just signed up to do another TEDx in next year. And so it's all part of the same kind of platform. I even teach 12-hour continuing studies courses on the same theme. So it's getting this message across, trying to use some meager knowledge of branding in there. So there's all of these things going on.
You're a man on a mission.
Yeah.
And just one last thing, thinking back again to your daughters and to what we teach at school. I mean, is this something that should be in the curriculum?
Oh, absolutely. Finland teaches AI from first grade. China has decided to start teaching it from kindergarten.
Yeah.
And one of the key things here is that you can no longer teach a static curriculum. When I was in high school, the teachers could prepare you for just about any profession because it wasn't going to change much over the next 20 years. But now you can't look more than 5 years in the horizon. So instead of trying to aim for a target that you can't see, it's kind of like trying to shoot an arrow around a corner. We need to train the people to understand disruption, and to understand artificial intelligence and use it in the same way that now people are more effective for knowing how to use Google search engine. Well, they've got to understand that the 5 years from now, there will be AI that makes that look primitive.
Yes.
So get ready for that.
And that gets all right down to your coaching program, right? It's preparing. So like that, we're ready for everything. It's a certain mindset and attitude is to not hide and run away, but to examine with curiosity, ask the right questions and look at it from our area. Peter, thank you very, very much for having time with us here today. Artificial intelligence and you, something we should certainly all take a close look at because it's not going away. So let's understand it so that we can use it and be resilient regarding it. Thank you very much for the rest of you out there. Let's get hold of the book now. Let's start with that and speak to you again this time next week.